Democratic lawmakers clashing with Attorney General Bill Barr in his first House Judiciary hearing. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal drew a contrast between Barr's response to the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and his response to armed white protesters in Michigan earlier this year. Here's part of that combative exchange.
Mr. Barr, on June 1st, there were protests against the murder of George Floyd and police brutality in Lafayette Park. Let us not be distracted by you or my GOP colleagues as to what these powerful and massive protests were actually about. They were about the persistent killing of Black bodies by law enforcement, and finally, an awakening in America of the conscience of our country. Do you think that it was appropriate at Lafayette Park to pepper spray, tear gas, and beat protesters and injure American citizens?
Well, I don't accept your characterization of what happened, but as I explained, the effort there was...
Mr. Barr, I just asked for a yes or no, so let me just tell you, I'm starting to lose my temper. According to sworn testimony before the House Natural Resources Committee by Army National Guard officer Adam DeMarco, who was there, this was, quote, an unprovoked escalation and excessive use of force against peaceful protesters.
Well, I don't remember
reports
DeMarco as being
Mr. Barr, excuse me,
involved
this is
in
my
any of the decision making.
Sir, the president told governors on a telephone call that the way to deal with the protesters of police brutality and systemic racism like in Lafayette Square is that, quote, you have to get much tougher. You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. These are terrorists. And he also talked about you on that call, sir. Here's what he said. He said, the Attorney General is here, Bill Barr, and we will activate Bill Barr and activate him strongly. But let's look at how you respond when the protesters are supporters of the president. On two separate occasions, after President Trump tweeted, "Liberate Michigan," to subvert stay-home orders to protect the public health of people in Michigan, protesters swarmed the Michigan Capitol carrying guns, some with swastikas, Confederate flags, and one even with a dark-haired doll with a noose around its neck. Are you aware that these protesters called for the governor to be lynched, shot, and beheaded?
No.
You're not aware of that?
I was not aware of it.
Major protests in Michigan. You're the Attorney General, and you didn't know that the protesters called for the governor to be lynched, shot, and beheaded. So obviously you couldn't be concerned about that.
Well, there are a lot of protests around the United States, and on June 1st, I was worried about the District of Columbia, which is federal.
In certain parts of the country, you're very aware of those, but when protesters with guns and swastikas and Confederate flags, excuse me, Mr. Barr, this is my time and I control it. You take an aggressive approach to Black Lives Matter protests, but not to right-wing extremists threatening to lynch a governor if it's for the president's benefit. Did I get it right, Mr. Barr?
I have responsibility for the federal government, and the White House is the seat of the executive
Mr. Barr, let me
branch,
just make it clear. You are supposed to
Michigan
represent
authorities
the people of the United States of America, not violate people's First Amendment rights. You are supposed to uphold democracy and secure equal justice under the law, not violently dismantle certain protesters based on the president's personal agenda.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal joins us now. Good morning, Congresswoman.
Good morning, Allison.
Let's talk first about the substance of what we learned yesterday, and then we can get a little bit into the style. So Attorney General Barr said he didn't know that the protesters in Michigan called for the governor to be lynched. He didn't know that tear gas was used against the peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square. He didn't know that President Trump's tweets existed about Michael Flynn and Roger Stone. And so what does that tell us about the Attorney General?
The single thing that emerges time after time after time is that Bill Barr has always been, is now, and will always be the henchman for Donald Trump. He acts as Donald Trump's personal attorney to get things done. Donald Trump activates him when he needs something done, and Bill Barr jumps. He is not the Attorney General for the people of the United States. And what he's doing is using the Justice Department, the enormous powers of the Justice Department on every level, whether it is going back to, withholding information from the Mueller report and mischaracterizing it, or whether it is in terms of the way he responds to certain protests. He is responding completely without regard to equal justice under the law. I mean, that's really clear over and over again. And he says that he's not aware of these things, but, he's under oath, and I cannot imagine that he was not aware of the protests in Michigan and the fact that the governor of Michigan had people with guns and swastikas and Confederate flags saying that they wanted to behead her. That makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, I mean,
he also, I think, tells untruths.
His point about the contradiction that you bring up about the protesters in Michigan who were armed and went into the state capitol versus the Black Lives Matter protests is that he's only in charge of federal buildings. So he's protecting the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon. He, can't protect the state house in Michigan. Is that legitimate?
No, I have looked very closely at what they're doing in Portland. It's right next to Seattle, obviously. I have a sister who's a county commissioner there. And what is clear is that they are not just protecting the federal courthouse. They are blocks away from the federal courthouse, picking up people in unmarked vans. I mean, serious constitutional violations that the federal agents are engaged in. And the other thing, had I had all day to question Bill Barr, I would have really enjoyed it, because the other thing is that it has never been the case that federal officials, I shouldn't say never, but rarely is it the case in recent history that federal officials are sent in to a state without the governor's consent, without the mayor's consent, with no coordination whatsoever. That is absolutely absurd and ludicrous. So Bill Barr is trying to have it both ways. He's trying to say, look, we have a responsibility to protect federal property, and then he goes far beyond that mission. Secondly, for somebody who has been in a party of states' rights, all of a sudden states don't seem to have very many rights unless Donald Trump wants them to. Bill Barr isn't in Alabama and Georgia and Florida making sure that those governors are forcing people to wear masks and not reopen too quickly. Those are causing far more deaths to American lives through the spread of COVID-19 than, some protesters at some building in Portland, Oregon. So there's just a huge discrepancy in how Bill Barr applies the law. It is not equal justice under the law.
You brought up your 5-minute limit, and that leads us to the format and the style of those hearings. The ranking Republican, Jim Jordan, said that you were basically not allowing the Attorney General to speak. Here's his tweet. Democrats don't want Attorney General Barr to speak. Democrats don't want Republican members of the Judiciary Committee to speak. Democrats don't want President Trump to speak. They'll come for you next. Number one, what is your response to that? And number two, do you think that format, did it shed much light for the viewers and the voters?
Well, the thing about the 5-minute format is every witness knows that the way to get away from answering questions is to just be very slow in your answers, to thank the Congress members for that excellent question, to not answer, to obfuscate, because you only have 5 minutes. So that means that every member of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, when Republicans controlled the committee, believe me, I watched time and time again them do that over and over again, and they do it to Democratic witnesses now, to majority witnesses now, where you have to take control of your time, because if you don't, the witness will do it. And so, yes, I think it's part of the way the format works, but it's also when a witness is trying to do that, I think it's an opportunity to make the point that the witness doesn't want to answer the question, which I think that was clear with Bill Barr when he says, I'm not aware of it, I don't know that, no, that didn't happen, a semantic discussion about what is tear gas and what isn't tear gas. So, you just have to control the time, and they don't expect it often, and there are different ways that members do it, but it's very important with a hostile witness who clearly knows what the rules are himself and is a skilled attorney.
Yeah. Congressman Jayapal, if you would, we have some more questions about what's coming up today. Can you stick around through a break?
I will, yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
That would be great. New Day will be right back.